Hi, and welcome back to Charmed, the Power of Three podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy. So it's been a little bit since I've been able to make an episode. Sorry about that. So on this episode, we're gonna be talking about episode 3 of the first season, titled "Thank You for Not Morphing." It was written by Chris Levinson and Zach Estrin, and it was directed by Ellen Pressman. It originally aired on October 21st, 1998. So this is the third episode that we're getting into. We're kind of getting a little bit, I don't want to say a little bit, we're getting some more groundwork on the mythology of the show. And you can kind of tell that they're still trying to figure everything out. An interesting little tidbit about this is that this is actually the fourth episode that they shot. Like I said earlier in some of our podcasts, I think it was the first 5 to 6 episodes were shot and then aired out of the order that they were shot, which kind of led to some continuity errors, but like not really, not enough that anyone should nitpick. So let's go over our cast real quick. So we've got Shannon, Holly, and Alyssa. T.W. King is in this episode, but Dorian Gregory is not as Daryl. We have Marcus Flanagan as Marshall, Eric Matheny as Fritz, Mariah O'Brien as Cinda. We also get introduced to Brian Kraz as Leo White, as we all know. And then we also have Tony Dennison, who is going to play Victor Bennett. So basically the log line of this episode, the plot, what we're doing here is that the sisters are being reunited with their father after 20-ish years. We haven't really figured that out, but that stays pretty consistent with the show. So their dad has been absent for about 20 years, and Phoebe is kind of the only one that really wants to see him, I think. Prue definitely doesn't want anything to do with their dad. Phoebe went to New York and came back in hopes of building some type of relationship with their father, while Piper's kind of playing the middle ground, very much still the middle sister, old enough to kind of remember what happened and how it was like with him not being around, but also old enough to remember what it was like to have him around. I think that's why she kind of always was kind of like, yeah, I don't want a relationship, but I do, and like he's the only family that we have left. So their dad shows back in town, and Prue is immediately skeptical. She's like, why now? Why 20 years later? What's going on that makes you want to be around us? So that's kind of like our first plot, our A plot that's going on here. Then we also have the B plot, which was going to be like our demon of the week. What's going on? They mix together by the end. Trust me. So, then you've also got the sisters still trying to interact like normal women in their late 20s, and they're trying to go to a house party across the street, and unknown to them, their neighbors are actually what are called shapeshifters. So this is the first time that shapeshifters are actually introduced in the series. The three neighbors, Marshall, Fritz, and Cinda, are siblings. I don't know if that's ever gone over after. They pose siblings. They might actually be siblings. Who knows? They're shapeshifters. They have the ability to kind of just change into anything that they want. So they pose themselves as siblings. I'm just going to go with that. And their main goal was to steal the Book of Shadows. So when I talk about what I'm saying, that the mythology of the show is kind of starting to come together, it's things like the Book of Shadows protects itself from evil. It does a little bit better of a job as the show goes on, because at that point, maybe it's because the sisters' powers have advanced so far, it's able to protect itself more because it's tied to their power so much. But at this point, evil is allowed to touch the Book of Shadows, but it's not able to take it out of the house. So there are different points in this episode where those shapeshifters, the siblings, have interjected themselves into the house. There's when they go to a house party, they are birds. Or at least that's what the sisters see. The sisters see birds as they're coming out of the house. Then there's also, I think, one time they turn into a dog. It's been a little bit since I've seen this episode. I really should have watched the episode before I started talking about this. But at one point, it turns into a dog. There is also a point where it poses as the mailman, and it poses as Andy. So they're willing to kind of pose as whatever and any means to get into the house, but also not blow their cover and still be able to steal the Book of Shadows. So you've got all that. The sisters are trying to figure out why the sisters are trying to figure out why every time they leave the house, either the doors are unlocked. It kind of brings out the sibling rivalry a little bit, because Prue is just assuming that Phoebe did it, where we all know that they actually all locked the doors. It's just that these shapeshifters are able to kind of just shift into whatever they want to shift into. And then you've got Prue thinking that it's their dad. That's her automatic assumption, is that their father has something to do with it. That he has nothing but malintentions for them. There's a reason that he left. There's a reason that he should stay gone. She actually uses her powers on him at one point. I think that's one of the only times that Prue actually uses her powers on a mortal. It does come up in a couple episodes from now, but at that point she didn't know that he was immortal. But this is one of the only instances in which that Prue is going to use her powers. Not necessarily for the best intentions. It's during a very heated argument where Victor is like, yes, I've always known that you're witches. I didn't want you to become a witch. Your Grams did. And that's why. That's the argument that takes place. That's why he left. Because he didn't want them to be able to fulfill their destiny. Now that they're actually starting to fulfill their destiny, he wants to come back and he wants to destroy the book. Without really talking to them, it kind of breaks Phoebe a little bit, because she's like, I've always looked up to you, and now you're doing the exact same thing that Prue is saying you're going to do, so Prue's always been right. Victor doesn't really show up after this for another season and a half. Right? Yeah. Season 3. So he comes back into season 3, but this is the only time that Tony Dennison is actually going to play Victor. This is one of the few times that casting had to get changed during all that, because I believe at that point Tony Dennison, when they wanted to bring him back in, he had been attached to either other shows or other projects, and that's when we got James Reed to play their father, which I'm not going to complain about. So a couple of plot introductions that are introduced. So we talked about the shapeshifters. They're able to kind of turn into anything that they want to. They're very low-level demons. I'm going to refer to them as that, even though the demon hierarchy isn't really introduced at this point. I don't think that it's something that the writers had thought of just yet. But if you go back, you can realize who's lower level versus upper level. So this is a lower level demon. So you also have Victor's protection ring. He wears this ring in order to protect himself from magic. Supposedly it's a ring that he's always kind of had, especially being around demons and witches and warlocks and everything back in the day. So he is able to survive the protection spell at the end of the episode because he wears that ring. We'll get into that in a little bit. Leo is introduced in this episode, as I said a little bit before. He's posing as a handyman at this point. We don't know who he is. He's just come to fix clocks and fix things around the house and try to restore the manor. At this point, that's all he really is. There is a spark between him and Piper that I think everyone kind of noticed, and I think maybe the writers noticed that Brian and Holly kind of had this thing that they were going to be the couple of the show. Not that you need a couple for the show, but like that was going to be them. So at some point the three siblings, the three shapeshifters, kind of get tired of chasing around the sisters and kind of get tired of trying to steal the book and it not being successful. So they finally just prey on what they know can get the sisters riled up, or what they believe would get them to give up the Book of Shadows, and that is posing as their father. They pose as Victor, not thinking, or maybe preying on the fact that they didn't have much of a relationship, so it's not like he's going to have to be answering intimate questions or not. And if they've been posing as neighbors for a long time, they might actually know some of this information that they would ask. But there is a certain point where the ring is on the table, because when Prue used her powers against Victor, his ring fell off. So it's on the table, and there is a point at which I think Victor's kind of just like, like, it is what it is. If you gotta kill me, you gotta kill me. And Prue puts the ring on who she believes is Victor, and Phoebe runs upstairs to find some type of spell, some type of something to get rid of these evil beings, right? This is also kind of where it comes into, like, the Book of Shadows like, page of the week, like, what are our weekly book images going to be? What's the Book of Shadows? What information is it going to give us now? There is a little bit of a not plot hole, but, like, where you can obviously tell that either the book wasn't finished, they didn't have the book on the set, and when Phoebe's kind of rummaging through and flipping through the book, you can tell it's not the real Book of Shadows. Just the pages are weird, the angle's weird. I'm assuming maybe they were probably shooting multiple things at one time. The book was left somewhere, and they were kind of just like, we need to shoot it. We'll figure it out later. So she goes upstairs. She finds what she calls a safety spell. Which, first of all, if they had that safety spell, you think that they would use it every single time they had a demon in the house. That's kind of funny that they have this one spell that can just get rid of every single evil that's in the house. Now, I do know that I don't think it would work on every single demon, but some of the ones that they come across in the first two years, they probably could have gotten rid of by just saying this spell. But I'm gonna leave that alone. I'm just gonna say maybe that was for that was specific for the shapeshifters that they were dealing with. So they start chanting the spell, and you can tell that Victor's kind of getting affected by it, but that ring is protecting him. It's doing its job. And they're able to get rid of these shapeshifters that are there. So at that point, it kind of shows that the relationship between the sisters and Victor isn't necessarily fixed. I think it takes another year or two for it to get better, for Prue to accept Victor the most, because she's the one who needs to accept that they can't change the past, but they can certainly keep moving forward in their future. So there's that. But it shows that they all still do have a love for him. And they end by watching a home video of Christmas morning with their mom, their dad, and them as little girls, presumably before everything else happened. Ironically, Alyssa Milano had to do the stand-in for their mom because they hadn't cast Patty yet, which I don't know if we knew that her name was Patty at that point, but I digress. So Alyssa Milano did the stand-in for that, which was, I mean, that's fine. It was, I guess they either didn't know if they were going to introduce their mom yet, or they did know and they just hadn't done the casting because it was so far. The episode was probably so far away. All in all, I kind of think, like, this was definitely a good episode. I think that Charmed had a very good run in the first set of episodes. Like, their first season, honestly, has maybe only one bad episode, if I can think of it, and I don't even necessarily think that it's a bad episode. I just kind of think that it was a filler episode. They didn't really know what to do, and they were testing to see where it would go, and I'm really glad they didn't do anything like that again. But we'll get to that when we cover that episode. But I think Charmed has a very good run in the first in the first half and the second half of just having episodes that captivate, and the audience is definitely in it, and it's a good first season. And it shows because after the second episode, and I don't know if I covered this in the last episode, but the show is actually picked up for a full season of 22 episodes after the second episode aired. So I guess that would be probably the week before this one aired, maybe a couple days before this one aired, they had ordered a full season. So that made it so the writers were able to mold the rest of the season and figure out where they were going, which I think is also why they were able to have such a good set of episodes in that first season, because sometimes some shows don't really know, and then you get like this either 10th or the 13th episode, and you're kind of like, what the hell is this? Why? Like, it feels like this could have been the finale, and then you get to the season finale, and that one feels like a season finale too, so it's kind of weird. But I'm glad that it got picked up after the second episode, because it definitely gave them more abilities to plan the rest of the season. I will say that those shapeshifters were pretty ugly. Like, that was back when they were using some pretty good cosmetics, or I don't think they were using green screen yet, probably. They were using some pretty gnarly looking cosmetics, and I think Cinda's the only one who really turns into this gross looking thing that I don't know if that's supposed to be the shapeshifter's original form, but she ain't the prettiest when she's angry, when she's hungry, as it's called. So there's that. I don't think that they knew that Leo was going to be such an important part of the show 8 years down the road, that they would still have him on the cast. I don't even think that he knew that. I don't think anyone knew where that was going. Andy doesn't necessarily take a huge part in this episode. We're still building on him and Prue kind of rekindling their relationship. They don't really know where they're going. It's a kind of like a will they, won't they. We kind of have these two love stories going on between the two bigger sisters. You're kind of rooting for both of them. You're rooting for Prue and Andy because they were childhood sweethearts and you wanted them to get together, but they kind of just like butted heads because he's a cop and he could always find out that they're witches, and Prue's not willing to give up their secret, or she's not willing to see how Andy's gonna react. So I think you kind of enjoy that. I think it's a good mix, and I'm glad Phoebe doesn't really have a love interest, because we all know down the road that's the only thing that matters to Phoebe is love. God bless her, love her, but we can get to that when we get there in those seasons. I want to thank you guys for continuing to tune in to these episodes. I feel like I just kind of like have a glass of wine and drink and talk about the show and the episode, and I don't really know where I'm going with any of it, and maybe sometimes these episodes will be kind of short, because there's not necessarily, in some of the episodes, there's not kind of information other than me just covering the plot. But then there's other times that some episodes have a lot of information about them. So I enjoy this, and thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope that you guys come back for more episodes. I'm hoping that as the seasons go on, or as I get more in tune into the episodes, that I am able to come up with questions or like trivia or something or whatever that's going to be interesting. But I really do thank you guys, and I hope that you guys come back for another episode. Thank you.